In the gritty favelas of São Paulo, the sounds of jackhammers and cement mixers provide an urban soundtrack. Construction crews are hard at work, erecting new homes under the Lula administration's ambitious housing programs. Down winding alleys, vendors hawk popsicles and cold drinks to neighborhood children, many from families newly lifted out of poverty by increased social spending. Brazil's economic resurgence is undeniable. Gross domestic product grew an astonishing 1.4% in just the second quarter of 2023, well above economists' projections. Consumer spending is absolutely booming, up 1.3% over the previous quarter, as Brazilians enjoy the windfall of generous government transfer payments. This torrid growth has been a political coup for President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. The charismatic left-wing leader swept back into power last year on a populist wave, vowing to uplift the working class and pour through bold economic intervention. And he has delivered, enacting minimum wage hikes, cash transfers, and other social programs that have put more reis into Brazilian households. But Brazil's sizzling economy is also setting off inflation alarm bells. Price pressures are building, fanned by the surplus of consumer spending power. At the chic rooftop bars of São Paulo's affluent Jardins neighborhood, well-heeled Brazilians grouse about skyrocketing prices for imported luxuries like French wine and Italian fashions. The central bank has taken note, halting its pandemic-era interest rate cuts in June and signaling that borrowing costs will likely rise from the current 10.5% level in the coming months. Financial markets are pricing in at least a quarter percentage point hike at the bank's next policy meeting. This emerging split between the Lula administration's left-wing policies and the bank's hawkish orthodoxy reveals deeper fissures in Brazilian society. Under the lush canopy of trees lining Paulista Avenue, protesters wave signs demanding better funding for public services, even as others call for fiscal restraint to tame deficits. Brazil seems to be having an identity crisis of sorts, caught between its lingering status as an elite-dominated economic power and its upstart ambitions to be a more egalitarian, socially mobile democracy. I met with Paulo Hardung, the former governor of Espírito Santo and a leader of the center-right opposition, at a sleek office tower overlooking the city. Over tiny cups of sugary Brazilian coffee, he worried that Lula's free-spending ways could jeopardize Brazil's economic credibility and spook foreign investors. The situation is unsustainable, Hardung told me, scrolling through charts on his iPad showing Brazil's ballooning deficit, which has reached an alarming 10% of GDP over the last year. Investors are losing faith. Indeed, the Brazilian real has been among the worst-performing emerging market currencies recently as funds flow out of the country, and stocks have slumped amid jitters over Lula's policy direction. But Maria de Penha, a community leader I visited in the humble São Miguel Paulista neighborhood, had a different perspective. As we strolled the cramped streets where her grandchildren played football, she praised the surplus of family income thanks to the Auxílio Brasil cash transfers. "We can actually buy meat and fresh produce now," she told me, a rarity in the past when money was tight. De Penha's community has been transformed, with new schools, health clinics, and housing springing up under Lula's watch. This disconnect, between enfranchised Brazilians reveling in newfound economic security and the elite hand-wringers fretting about deficits and inflation, gets at the deeper tension plaguing this vast nation. For centuries, Latin America's largest economy was dominated by a wealthy, insular oligarchy that hoarded resources among itself while the masses subsisted in cyclical immiseration. Brazil's modernizing economic boom of the 2000s began changing that power structure somewhat, creating a nascent middle class. But stark inequality persisted. Now, Lula and his Workers' Party are attempting to decisively upend that inequitable system, simultaneously empowering Brazil's long-neglected working classes, while antagonizing the entrenched interests who benefited from it. Whether Brazil can navigate these shoals successfully remains to be seen. Can a thriving consumer economy coexist alongside sound monetary policy and fiscal prudence? Or will the Lula administration's bold redistributionist agenda ultimately spark a backlash from investors, markets, or even within Brazilian society itself? These tensions seem likely to intensify as prices continue climbing. The central bank's hawkish resolve will be tested against the Lula government's insistence on doubling down on its populist economic platform, all while Brazilian society broadly reckons with its identity going forward as a dynamically prospering emerging power or one still mired in historical disparities. As the cacophonous soundtrack of construction and commerce echoes through the sweltering streets of São Paulo, the nation's very economic soul hangs in the balance.